Hello and welcome to one of the first times back now for streaming here in the middle of the week, getting kind of caught up and back into the swing of things. So, thank you for joining me this evening and hanging out for a bit. If at any time during the conversation this evening you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you like anything that I happen to touch on, please let me know with a comment. And of course, liking and all of that good stuff that goes with wanting to produce for YouTube. So tonight is a bit of a kind of a catch-all. After doing the most recent live stream in the middle of the week in the middle of the day, coming back and giving you kind of, for those of you who are able to join here in the evening, a similar kind of update about where the show is and what is likely to be happening here in the next couple of months. If you're a Patreon supporter, then you know where a lot of this is coming from through the weekly updates and things like that. Once we get through that, I've got a couple of books I want to recommend, depending on where you are in your journey, whether that's wanting to dive a bit more into permaculture education, teaching children in a homeschooling environment, some articles about environmental education that I would suggest folks read, and also just another book with a bunch of interesting activities that came across my desk. That one came across a little while ago, but I had the chance finally to sit down and interview the author of that book, and that'll be out here in a couple of weeks, but I'll touch on all of that here in a bit. When it comes to the show, as I think I may have talked about a little in some of the episodes, my primary plan for the 12th year of the show is to focus largely on making sure that I'm here for live streams, so that we have 24 of those in the year ahead, as well as 45 long format episodes. There is some material that's coming up through conversations with people like Dan Palmer, or this special series that I'm working with Rosemary Morrow about, which are likely to yield some additional bonus content throughout the year. There's also an episode that just dropped for patrons today that will be out on Friday everywhere else, that is a shorter interview conversation with Hadley from Lobelia Commons as they're putting together a book for 2022, and there's a call for submissions. But with that kind of stuff, that's irregular, and I don't know how much is going to make it into the podcast throughout the year beyond those like 45 main episodes and these live streams. The other thing that I'm working on is in 2022, once we kind of get through the end of this year, I'm in production mode right now and have the series on permaculture and land access, which will start airing here in the next week or two, which will see us through November, possibly into early December. There are a couple of shows that will end the year, and then Christmas break, and we're into 2022. And I've already got the first episode of the year planned. I know I've been, over the years, doing state of the podcast episodes with the new year, but I might skip that this year and just kind of work that here into the live streams and some of the other updates that are going out. But once we hit 2022, looking to relaunch some of the classes that have been offered, some in kind of a reworked fashion. And also, if you haven't seen one, the listener survey will be dropping here on Patreon this week, going out in the newsletter next week, as well as an announcement to check out the podcast website and fill that out here. That should likely be next week, to get some of your feedback and see where to kind of take the show in the next year, and know what's really stood out for you, what's worked, what hasn't worked. With that is also some information about what classes you might like to see. The storytelling series is still probably my primary focus, but after feedback from some students about the storytelling for personal transformation class, looking to break that into kind of two pieces, one of which will be a kind of a foundational class about exploring our values and what matters to us. And that will be then kind of the entryway into a lot of the other courses that I have sitting out there. So then that would be like exploring our values. The second half of that would be the storytelling for personal transformation. I've got the storytelling for business as well as the storytelling for design pieces. I'm still putting together what those will look like, but likely to be somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks at a go for each of those. One of the reasons why tonight I kind of wanted to look at some materials that have been influencing me when it comes to teaching permaculture is that I'm putting together the material for a landless permaculture design course designed for people who are in cities or environments where you may not have access to much in the way of green spaces. And so, what does permaculture look like where you are and where, honestly, the majority of humanity is at this point living in cities? And making that more of a student driven class, as I've been working with many of my colleagues in the community talking about what the core of a permaculture design course is and what is necessary. We've been kind of workshopping what the actual skeleton of the permaculture design course looks like and how we can fill in the rest of that information. That as much as there is this 72-hour curriculum that the community has kind of agreed to coming from Bill's designer's manual and the two courses that he was teaching in the 1980s, that there's a lot more room for us to customize and adapt that material while still delivering a full PDC. And so that's one of the other pieces that I'm looking at next year, and we'll share more of that as that comes together with the online space that we have available through things like here on YouTube or Zoom calls, looking to teach with these tools rather than looking for a course management system or something like that. Use the tools that are available to share more and more of this information with, live instruction for those who are able to attend, and then, so that students can watch classes afterwards and join in the experience, whether that's a permaculture design course fully or some kind of a short course. Hey, Ellie, thanks for coming in tonight. I'm kind of just giving a rundown of some of the classes that I'm looking to explore in 2022 and offer for those who are interested. Talking about a landless permaculture design course at the moment because of how many folks have kind of moved out of that space of being on the land, while also trying to honor some of the conversations I've had about, there's a lot of land that doesn't need us. And so how can we still practice permaculture where we are? And then, other than the permaculture design course, looking at some material for enrichment for homeschoolers and homeschooling families after reaching out last year about the possibility of putting together some enrichment materials and getting positive feedback. As much as I write tons of emails every week, the patron updates, get in touch with people about what's going on, and put a lot of material in writing, I'm just not feeling like much of an author right now. And so looking for other ways to share this information, and it's teaching classes and using these kinds of spaces like, YouTube and Zoom and all the others is really something that I'm just enjoying. And so what can we do there? And so when it comes to that, for like homeschooling material, looking at offering something like every other month that runs for 4 to 6 weeks, that is enrichment, that, we can do some small group classes, maybe 10 to 15 families at a time, and provides some like semi-custom content. It's one of the pieces of feedback that I've received when been working through is that the one-on-one models that I really like to work with when it comes to mentoring and consultations and some things like that, that it's difficult to find a price point that makes classes accessible in that way. And so, you know, taking and accepting that feedback and responding to it in a way that makes all these other pieces that I care about so much more, um, yeah, easy for people to interact with while still delivering something that is a unique experience for those particular participants and built around what it is that they are working on. In my city, density is a big topic. Yeah, it's one of the pieces that I've encountering here where we are in Northern Virginia for my wife and I. Starter homes are about a $500,000. And because of people wanting as much home as possible, the little bit of land that property sits on is filling all of it. And I see more and more of these small 10th acre lots, which are having ever larger houses placed on them. So you have a little bit of a backyard or patio area for people, if you want to entertain. But even then, in a lot of cases, that's being hardscaped. So there's just enough grass as a border around the house for people to, walk down to access the backyard, or perhaps as a small play area for young children. But it's not much in the way for people to really have what I would think of as a yard. I mean, I grew up my family home was a half an acre as a kid, and so like that was its own kind of experience for me. And those kinds of suburban spaces are less and less available. And yeah, just the sprawl is really, really weird. Even though, like as I say, where I am here, we have 11 or 13 public parks that are all within about a mile of where I live. So you can get access to green space if you want to, but your ability to really have something to work or do anything with is just not there. And as I investigate that further, that seems to be more and more the case for people. And so, yeah, that's a big piece of why I'm really interested in, this a landless permaculture design course, as well as doing some of this enrichment work with families, because it takes kind of a different approach these days to look at how we're going to connect children with nature, and understanding more and more as I work through it that, we can do that with a verge, or in finding a dark place and pulling out a pair of binoculars and looking at the night sky. And how can we, as permaculture practitioners and people who are interested in building all of these kinds of connections, work with what we have, and like really falling back into that work and adapting more and more to these spaces. And yeah, I just think about, if we're going to love and care for so many of these things, we have to have a connection to them, and building that up and working on it, and knowing that we can do it by building a garden in pots on a balcony, or to go to a local park and go bug hunting and things like that. And that's where, um, yeah. And the other thing that I have kind of, there are two other things that I wanted to talk about tonight that I'm working on beyond the podcast itself. One of those is a retreat in September of 2022 in or around Asheville, North Carolina. We're still kind of finding the space for a storyteller's retreat, to take a lot of these pieces that I've been working on when it comes to how do we communicate, how do we tell stories, how do we integrate more of ourselves into our lives and our work, to do a hands-on intensive. Looks like that's going to run probably from a Wednesday until Sunday. um, in September, as I say, in Asheville. But yeah, give an opportunity for people to be able to travel in Wednesday morning. We'll start the class Wednesday afternoon, share a meal together, and then tell stories into the evening, and then fill the next 3 days, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, with more conversations about what story is and what does it mean to use story in our everyday lives, while then ending with a kind of storytelling roundtable or bonfire on Saturday night, and then a kind of breaking camp on Saturday morning, or on Sunday morning, I should say, after our final meal together, and having the day for people to travel. That's something that I'm really looking forward to, and we'll be getting the details for that out in early January. And that's when I expect to kind of do a big announcement with a lot more concrete detail about the classes that will be coming with the show um, next year, as kind of an addition to my other permaculture work. With that, I have suspended consultations indefinitely, and so if you're watching this and would like to work with me, I'm kind of sending everything through meanderings right now and focusing on that while putting together the last of the material for the end of the year and developing some of these classes, which, as I say, those should come out and be announced in January with quite a bit more detail about what they'll be and when those should launch. The other piece that I'm working on kind of with and beyond the show is I've connected with a local nonprofit in Virginia, which is also our like sustainable agriculture organization. It's a group called Future Harvest. And so this year their conference is virtual. I'll be attending that, as well as interviewing the keynote speaker for this year and sharing some of that on the show, and then also kind of doing a post conference episode to let you know like what I learned, what was really interesting, where were the cool conversations, and who are some people who I'd recommend as permaculture practitioners who are interested in working the land and being a part of the landscape, where to go and who to check out. And because that conference is virtual this year, I'll be sharing some registration information and some other details as part of the show in the weeks and months ahead in case you'd like to attend. I'm not only promoting this, but I will also be in attendance and hope to see you there. Yeah, with that bit of a recap, some of the things that I wanted to bring up tonight when I was talking about, how can we adapt what it is that we're doing and where we are to teaching and education. One of the awesome books on my radar is Chris Salisbury's Wild Nights Out. He's a fellow who's been doing environmental education and outreach in the UK for a long number of years, and finally got around to putting all of his thoughts and ideas into a book. And it's fabulous, not only for children, but also for adults. And he gives us a lot of different ideas of how to explore the world around us at night, how to readapt ourselves as adults to nighttime spaces, while also, as much as he would like us to be able to get out into some wild spaces walking through nature, there are a lot of activities that are the kinds of things that we can do in backyards. As parents, if you're an environmental educator yourself or do that kind of work, plenty of group activities. And then also suggestions if you want to get involved and lead those kinds of events. He and I were able to record an interview last week, and that I do think that should be out in December. If not, it'll be out in early January. And just, yeah, a great guy with a lot to share about reconnecting with the dark and the night and the natural world. And so, yeah, this is a book that I really recommend, and I look forward to sharing that interview with you. Something else, if you're an educator or someone working with folks. I know that I've talked a lot about my background in environmental education and some of the training that I've had there. If you'd like to learn more about environmental education and how some of these ideas and approaches could be applied to the world that you live in, there's the Bioneers series and Ecological Literacy, edited by Michael Stone and Zenobia Barlow. That is one of my favorites. As much as I like the work of David Orr or David Sobel, this is a great collection of essays on environmental education across a broad scope, and is one of those like permaculture adjacent books that I would recommend. I also, as I think about ways to approach the permaculture design course a little bit differently, that environmental education as an approach is really where, for me, everything really comes together. In a conversation with Rosemary Morrow, she, I asked her kind of like, why permaculture? Why is that the thing that matters to her and is important? And she said because for her, there isn't anything else. And that's where I'm kind of at with some of my thoughts on education when it comes to teaching adults and a lot of children. That the field of environmental education provides a lot of resources and is something that is very permaculture adjacent and worth exploring. Once you go through ecological literacy, then I might say to pick up the work of David Orr, and his essay series Earth and Mind is really fabulous, but is a little bit more technical on some of the ideas of environmental education. And yeah, I find that ecological literacy and those essays are a bit more accessible. Something else I've really been digging into lately is the Teenage Liberation Handbook by Grace Llewellyn. This is, I think, the first edition. There are some newer ones out, which I would say to pick up if you're interested in this subject. My son is homeschooled, and his mother and I use an unschooling approach to that, which you may also think of like a student-directed learning or democratic education, depending on what systems you encounter. And I'm just really intrigued by the difference that it is making for him in being able to dig a little bit more deeply into his personal interests, and then the ways that, as an educator, and his dad, that I can apply creativity to make those experiences more educational and deepen them for him. And yeah, Grace Llewellyn's book has been just a great accessory to this road that we're going on right now, in connecting my son to a more fulfilling for him education, as it just was not, the school system that he was in was not serving him. And so what could we do to find something that would? In mind with ecological literacy and environmental education, if you are someone who's interested in teaching permaculture, I like Rosemary Morrow's Earth User's Guide to Permaculture is my hands down probably favorite book to teach from. It's a good mix of, I think, the on the ground, hands on tools and lessons we need as permaculture practitioners to kind of implement these ideas in the landscape, while also raising a number of ideas when it comes to how we apply this in other areas of our lives, beyond just growing food. And that's where Rosemary's book, Earth User's Guide to Teaching Permaculture, is just fantastic. It takes everything that you could want to use in a class and breaks down lessons and gives you information that you can directly apply in the classroom. It's also a place where I would recommend, if you're a teacher or parent who would like to give children more permaculture in their lives, there's a lot that you can pull from here directly. about how to talk about these ideas, and then, through knowing your children and students, be able to apply this to your particular circumstances. And it's one that I'll be pulling from likely quite a bit in the year ahead, developing classes and putting together some of these other pieces. And it's also something that I just look back to whenever I have a question about permaculture or I'm thinking about something. That's usually the first place that I'll flip through now. After working with Rosemary's Earth User's Guide itself for so long, the teaching permaculture is just amazing. And if I recall, that is still available through. I believe that's available through Meliadora right now. I do her book, Earth User's Guide to Permaculture, should be available through them as well. If you want to check that out, the online store is at permacultureprinciples.com. If you want to grab really any of Rosemary's work. Oh, excuse me just a second. So then, with the bit of time that we have available for those of you who are still with me after all of that, if you have any questions, I want to drop those into the chat. I'm going to stick around for probably another 5 or 10 minutes, depending on what comes up, and then draw this to a close. Also, if you've been watching this with me, if there's a particular topic that you'd like me to bring up or discuss in a future live stream, I'm looking for any suggestions. Getting back into the flow of things, it's just been wanting to sit and get used to doing this again. To flip on the camera and kind of speak extemporaneously for a little bit about some of the things that are going on and what have been calling me lately. But would like these to be more focused and viewer driven, as I just pull a lot of inspiration from Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, and the idea that education is a dialogue, and that anything that I create, even though a lot of times it's being broadcast out into the world, that it is a give and take between myself and the people who are participating in the time together or the conversation. And so if there's ever anything that you'd like for me to bring up in one of these, let me know. Drop something in the comments for this episode. Send me an email. I'm always available, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. And I'll take what you've shared with me and use that to build up these in the future. One of my deep interests in running the live streams and spending this time kind of on camera is also to share all the pieces that don't make it into the podcast proper. There's, wanting to do some of these shorter episodes throughout the year as they're available, sitting down for the live streams and all of the other pieces that I can to share more than just the long format episodes, as still largely a one-person operation, though of course David Bilbrey shares interviews with me from time to time, as does Karin Olson, and I put out some of those calls as well for anybody who would like to record a piece for me to share on the podcast. That all the editing, all the production, and all those other things are still left up to me. But even in saying that, it limits how much I can produce a year when it comes to the long format episodes. I'm finding that 45 of those does seem to be about the right number, and there's some the flexibility there to be on a more or less regular release schedule, but being able to respond to some emergencies as they arise. But looking at how long it takes to produce an hour-long show, which is about 12 hours from beginning to end, versus like a 10 to 15 minute piece, even if it's recorded and edited, that's something that I can turn around in 2 to 3 hours. And I guess those ratios do work about the same, don't they? But in doing that, The long format is just, yeah, there's only so many of those that I can produce in a year while also doing everything else. And that's where these live streams and other pieces kind of fill in those gaps. So, yeah, um, I see we don't have any more coming into the chat, so I think I will go ahead and draw this evening to a close. Thank you to everyone who was able to join me for a little bit today and be a part of this. I always appreciate it. I will have another one of these out here in a couple of weeks. That will be a midweek live stream, and the next one of these evening live streams will be the first Tuesday of December. And so, for those of you who can catch me then, I'll see you then. So, thank you and have a great rest of your day.